November 30th through December 4th, join James and Teresa Merritt for the 6th Annual Mountaintop Conference, featuring Overwhelmed But Not Broken. 3 power-packed teaching sessions from Dr. James Merritt. We'll have special evenings with Luke Zamperini, Will Graham, and musical entertainment at the Smoky Mountain Opry. There's even an optional day at Dollywood. Meet us on the mountain November 30th through December 4th in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Call 800-523-3919 or visit mountaintopconference.com for all the details.
Today on Touching Lives.
This becoming one flesh, this being glued together, this being stuck together, that's what getting married is all about. That's what God has joined together. Becoming one flesh, listen, becoming one flesh, getting married, this is something we don't understand. Getting married and becoming one flesh, that's not what two people do to each other. That's not even what two people do for each other. It's what God does to you.
With hope and encouragement for life, this is Touching Lives with James Merritt.
I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 19. Now I want you to look, we're going to look today at a few verses, and next week we'll come back and look at some more. But if you want to know what Jesus said about marriage and what Jesus said about divorce and what Jesus said about love, pretty much everything Jesus says is going to be summarized right here. He's going to say it. If you're single, he's talking to you. If you are married, he's talking to you. If you are divorced, or single, or divorced and remarried, he's got some things to say to you. Now, the question is, why did Jesus even address this topic? He wasn't even married. Why did this topic even come up? Well, it came up because of a question that his favorite antagonist, the Pharisees, asked him. So we pick up in Matthew 19, verse 3. And the Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? Now, to put this in modern day terms, what they were saying was this: Jesus, is there anything like, or is there anything such as a no-fault divorce? You may or may not know that California was the very first state in the country that passed a law saying basically you can get a divorce for any reason you want to. You don't have to defend it. You don't have to argue for it. You don't have to do anything to get it granted. You can just go and say, I don't like him anymore. I don't like her anymore. We're not compatible. We should have never gotten married to begin with. It doesn't matter, and we will grant you a divorce. And that view now is held in all 50 states. Anybody, anytime, for any reason, can get a divorce. Well, these Pharisees, being sticklers for the law, they kind of went deeper. Here's what they were saying. They weren't just saying, can you get a divorce for any reason? Because they were the religious fundamentalists of their day. What they were saying was, okay, is it biblical to get a divorce for any reason? When is it right to get a divorce? In God's eyes, can you get a divorce for any reason and get away with it? Now, you have to understand the historical background of this question. Back in the days of Jesus, there were basically two schools of thought about getting a divorce, and they were led by two prominent rabbis. And just like today, guess what? One was a liberal and one was a conservative. Now, the liberal view said, you can get a divorce for any reason you want to. Let me give you an example. Ladies, you'll love this. If your wife burned dinner, the husband could get a divorce. Yeah, if the wife burned dinner, get a divorce. If the husband decided the wife had too many wrinkles, he'd get a divorce. So if she looked bad or cooked bad, you could say, hit the road, Jackie, and she's gone. Now, there was another school of thought. It was a lot more conservative. And it had basically narrowed the reason for divorce down to only one thing, and that was some type of sexual sin. So I want you to notice right off the bat that one thing hasn't changed in 2,000 years. The Pharisees were looking for reasons that a couple could get a divorce rather than looking for a recipe on how to stay married. So they were really asking two questions of Jesus, and they thought they had Jesus right where they wanted him. They said, okay, Lord, in God's eyes, how can you get out of a marriage? That's our question. In God's eyes, how can you get out of a marriage and still be okay with God? And then they kind of followed it up with this question. And oh, by the way, if you ever decide to get out of one marriage, how can you get back into another marriage? Well, I love what Jesus does, and I'm trying to learn from him every day. And as Jesus often did, guess what he did not do? He didn't answer their question. Not at that time. He did not answer their specific question. Well, why didn't he answer their question? It seems like a straightforward question. The reason why he didn't answer their question was they were asking the wrong question. Instead of answering the question, how can you get out of a marriage? Jesus said the question you ought to be asking is, why should you stay in a marriage? If you're not happy, if you're miserable, if you're not compatible, if you don't like each other, if you can't, if she snores, he snores, whatever the reason may be, why should you stay in a marriage? And so what Jesus does is, brilliant as he is, being the Son of God, he gives the right answer to the right question. Short, succinct, simple, but garlic breath strong. Now listen to what Jesus said in verse 4. He answered, have you not read? Now he's saying that to the Pharisees because they're supposed to be the experts on the Bible. Have you not read that he, that is God, who created them from the beginning, made them male and female, and said, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What God therefore has joined together, let not man separate. I love what Jesus does. And by the way, if you want to know what Jesus and what God says about marriage, it's real, real simple. Just you write down 3 words. Ready? One and done. That's it. It's real simple, right? Not complex. One and done. Now, you're sitting out there and you're already sweating bullets because you're divorced. You've been divorced, and maybe you're divorced and single. Maybe you're divorced and remarried. Maybe you've been divorced and remarried and divorced and remarried and divorced and remarried. I want you to relax because this message is not for you. Matter of fact, okay, I don't know who said that, but God help you. All right, now listen. Believe it or not, this message this morning is not even primarily for married people. We talk about you next week. This marriage really is for those of you who are single. Okay, it really is. Because there are some things you better realize before you get married. So I'm primarily this morning talking to those of you who are single, whether you've never been married or been married and divorced. Now, secondly, it is for those of you who are in a marriage. It doesn't matter to me whether you're in a happy marriage or an unhappy marriage. Because what we're going to do is take a trip back down memory lane to when you did get married. And what I want you to do is if you're married this morning, whether you're happy in your marriage or not, I want you to go all the way back to that time when you got married. And let's just remind ourselves what God said about marriage then and what he says about your marriage now. So the question I'm going to answer this morning is this. Can two become one and done? And you're going to find this morning you can if you put into practice these principles. Ready? Principle number 1. You've got to understand God's plan for marriage. So if you're here this morning and you're single and you want to get married one day, let me encourage you, understand God's plan for marriage. What is it? Verse 4. He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? Now, that one statement tells us what the inventor of marriage intended for the product of marriage to look like from the very beginning. God said, okay, this is what I want marriage to look like. I'm inventing it. You can't change it. This is my invention. This is my creation. He says, I want marriage to look like this, male and female. God created them male and female. Now, we already know who the them is he's talking about, right? He's talking about the first recorded married couple in history, Adam and Eve. He created them male and female. So what Jesus says is, look, from the very beginning, go all the way back to the very first couple, to the very first marriage ever recorded in history, and he says God built several qualities into what makes a marriage a marriage. So let's talk about it. What makes a marriage a marriage? Well, first of all, a duality. It takes two to get married. You can't marry yourself, right? That's why God created them, not just him or not just her. God created them. There's a duality. Second characteristic, heterosexuality, right? He didn't create them male and male. He didn't create them female and female. He created them male and female. So this is what God said. God said, it's my creation, it's my invention, you can't change it. A marriage is not made up of two husbands. A marriage is not made up of two wives. It's made up of a husband and a wife. The only picture in God's album of a marriage is of a man and a woman. So duality takes two. Heterosexuality takes a male and a female. And then the third characteristic is monogamy. He did not create male and females. He did not create males and female. He created male and female. One man, one wife, one life. Now, not politically correct, will not get me on the front page of the New York Times, will not get me on The View. But this is God's plan for marriage. This is where marriage begins. One male, one female. Not two males, not two females. One male and one female. Now, let me just say this. If God had intended polygamy, He could have very easily created one man and two women. If God had intended homosexuality, He could have very easily created two men or two women. But from the very beginning, God says, okay, it's my creation, my invention. You don't get to change it. I got a patent on it. And He says from the very beginning, my plan for marriage is duality. It takes two. Heterosexuality, it takes a man and a woman. And monogamy, each are to be married only to each other. So, number one, understand God's plan for marriage. All right? Number two, remember God's purpose for marriage. Now, if I were to ask some of you this morning, what is God's purpose for marriage? What is God's primary purpose? Believe this or not, the majority of you would probably get the wrong answer. Because this may shock you. The primary purpose of marriage is not to procreate children. I mean, we've got couples in this church, they can't have children. Does that mean they're any less married than other couples who are not married? Absolutely not. You can get married and not be able to have children. You have to understand the primary purpose of marriage, because if you don't understand the purpose of marriage, you will never understand the place that marriage ought to have in our society and in our culture, and you'll never understand the position that it holds in God's eyes. So what is the purpose of marriage? Verse 5, and He said, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Now, do you see that word therefore? Anytime you see the word therefore, always ask, what is that therefore? Therefore. Always ask that question. Why is that word there? Well, he's pointing back to what he just said. He said, in other words, literally because of this. Here's what he's saying. Because God created them, male and female, not male and male, not female and female, one male, one female, because God created them male and female, because of the fact that marriage goes all the way back to that one act of God in the beginning, when He created Adam and Eve, male and then female, therefore, He says, with that understanding, the boy grows up to be a man. He's to hold fast to his wife so that, say it with me, the two shall become one flesh. Let's say that again. The two shall become one flesh. The reason why God married you is so you become one flesh. Not so you'd have children. Not so you'd be happy. Not just so she'd meet your sexual needs. Not just so He would give you the credit card for the mall. The number one reason that God married you was so that the two of you would become one flesh. Now watch this, watch this. A parent and a child are two. A brother and a sister are two. But a husband and a wife are one. Now, that's so important to understand that Jesus does something in this discussion. He only does one time. He repeats Himself again. Look down in verse 6. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. If you divide one, what's left? Only a fraction of what used to be one. You don't divide one and get two ones, right? You get half and you get half. Now, when you start thinking that way, that puts a whole new perspective on those of you, but first of all, you're single and you're thinking about getting married, and those of you who are already married. God's primary purpose for marriage is real simple. Two to become one. But when you finally get this in your mind, so that's why I got married. That's why God put us together. He put us together not so she'd be her and I'd be me. Yes, you're individuals, but spiritually and emotionally and physically, you are one in the eyes of God. Once you get that down, then you'll learn the third principle. And that's when you say, I have to commit to God's permanence for marriage. Once I understand what the plan is, once I realize what the purpose is, I've got to commit to God's permanence for marriage. Now you understand the significance of what Jesus goes on to say in verse 6. This is his conclusion. What therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. Now, I'll tell you something kind of interesting. If you go back to the Greek phrase, what that Greek word literally means, you know what that word literally means, the word joined together? You know what that phrase literally means in the Greek language? It means to be glued to. Now, I find that kind of interesting. Literally, here's what Jesus said. What God has glued together, let no man separate. All right, now watch. Let me tell you how smart Jesus is. Don't raise your hand because I don't want it to start a fight in the building. Do you ever feel like you're kind of stuck with the person you're married to? You are. Stuck. You're glued. God glued the two of you together. Because listen to what Jesus said. He said, this becoming one flesh, this being glued together, this being stuck together, that's what getting married is all about. That's what God has joined together. Becoming one flesh, listen, becoming one flesh, getting married, this is something we don't understand. Getting married and becoming one flesh, that's not what two people do to each other. That's not even what two people do for each other. It's what God does to you. It's what God does for you. You become one flesh. Marriage is not what culture joins together. Marriage is not what nature joins together. Marriage is not what the law joins together. Marriage is not even what sex or love joins together. Marriage is what God joins together. I'll give you an illustration. I think we would all agree that Time magazine is not exactly a bastion of conservative biblical theology, right? I think we would all agree with that, okay? Well, just recently there was an article in Time magazine entitled, Why Marriage Matters. And I want you to listen to what this article said. You can read this up on the screen. In the past 40 years, the face of the American family has changed profoundly. What is significant about contemporary American families compared with those of other nations is their combination of frequent marriage, frequent divorce, and the high number of short-term cohabiting relationships. And of course, we can now add to that gay marriage. Now, the article goes on to say this. How much does this matter? More than words can say. There is no, now I'm going to read this slowly. There is no single force causing as much measurable hardship and human misery in this country as the collapse of marriage. That's not what I said. That's what Time magazine said. They said more than a bad economy, more than financial instability, more than terrorism, more than war or the threat of war, more than the proliferation of nuclear weapons, more than any of that, they said there's no single force causing as much measurable hardship and human misery in this country as the collapse of marriage. Now, we've gotten this idea that marriage is a contract with a 30-day out. So if at any moment you don't like the marriage, you get out. If at any moment I don't like the marriage, I'll get out. Now, I got to thinking about that the other day. You know, there's times I wish marriage was a contract. I'll tell you why. One person said this, I have figured out how to cure the high divorce rate in this country. Have cell phone companies write the marriage contracts, you'll never get out of them. Now, here's the point. Here's the point. Here's what Jesus is saying. You ready for this? Since God is really the only one that makes a marriage, God is the only one that can break a marriage. You got that? If God's the one that makes it, God is the only one that can break it. So let me just make it even plainer. What has been done by God cannot be undone by humanity. Marriage is always the work of God. Divorce is always the work of people. And only God has the right to separate what God has joined together. Jesus said, guys, you don't get it. It is God that brings a couple together. It is God that bonds a couple together. It is God that binds a couple together. It is God that builds a couple together. That's why Jesus said in verse 6, what therefore God has joined together, let not man separate. God has instituted a three-step process for marriage. He says, here's how it works. Parents have a child. These parents have a boy. This parent has a girl. The boy grows up and becomes a man. The girl grows up, she becomes a woman. Man meets woman. They fall in love. The man finds a woman, proposes to the woman accepts, and together they say, we want to become husband and wife. Step 3, they have the ceremony, God does the wedding, they go on a honeymoon, they consummate the marriage, and the two become one flesh. God says, that's the way it works. That's the way I invented it. That's the way I created it. Those are the rules that I've written. You can't break them. You can't change them. You can call anything else a marriage you want to call it, but if it's not only a man and only a woman committed to each other, it is not a marriage. And this is exactly the opposite of our culture. Because what our culture says today is not, okay, grow up, find a woman, get married, become one flesh. No, here's what they say, hook up, shack up, and break up. That's our culture. Hook up, shack up, break up. And you know what's so sad about that? Doing it God's way is harder, but you get better results. Doing it the other way is easier, but it has bitter consequences. Marriage is hard. Marriage is hard work. I have a great marriage. I don't have a perfect marriage. We'll talk about this more. Teresa and I, we've had our ups and downs. We've had our arguments. We've had our disagreements. And we have found in 37 years, two becoming one is hard, very hard. It's hard to come together. Sometimes not easy to stay together. But listen to this. Two becoming one is hard. But God says one becoming two is impossible. Not in my eyes. You can do it in the law's eyes. You can do it in the court's eyes. You can even do it in your eyes. But in my eyes, two cannot become one. So to all of us in this room who have said, I do, here's a word of encouragement, just to kind of help you. What God has joined together, God can keep together. And if those two have become one, we'll look to the one who invented marriage to begin with. You can stay together. So what it really all boils down to this morning is this, and it always does, really. If you're here this morning and you're married, and your marriage is shaky, and you're thinking about checking out, and you're thinking about taking the route off the interstate of life that says divorce, I just want to be very plain and very upfront. Divorce is never in the perfect will of God. Never. Never. N-E-V-E-R. Never. God hates divorce. And next week, we're going to really get a lot deeper into this subject, and I'm going to be sharing with you some ways in the next 2 weeks especially, particularly on how do you stay together when it's hard? How do you stay together when you don't want to stay together? How do you become one when you're even saying, I think I'd rather be a fraction of what I used to be? How do you do that? But for today, here's the thought. God says it's one and it's done. I've said this to you before, there are no problems too big to solve, just people too little to solve them. There is no marriage in this room that God does not want to stay together, and God does not want to keep together, and God can't hold together if you'll understand His plan, realize His purpose, and then say, Lord, I am committed to the permanence of this marriage. I am here to tell you, after 37 years of marriage, I don't think there's a greater accomplishment in life for a man or a woman in this day and age in which we live than to keep hitting those milestones 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I tell Teresa all the time, I'm looking forward to growing old with you. And she'll tell me sometimes, rarely, but sometimes she'll say, I'm looking forward to your dying too. But I'm telling you, I am telling you, it is worth it. You can do it. If God can raise His Son from the dead, He can raise a marriage from the dead. So let's today, maybe if you're married, just kind of renew that vow in that chair. Maybe today go back and say, you know, I do math, and I'm going to get this math right. It's one and done. We're not two. We're one. And because of the one that brought us together and made us one, we will stay one till death do us part.
If you're a Christian and you're considering divorce, already divorced, or even in a second or third marriage, chances are you've had your fill of well-meaning fellow believers guilting you into full condemnation. Don't let what others say pull you away from your Father who loves you. Call Touching Lives today at 800-413-1131 and let's pray together.
Jesus Christ is the most influential person to ever walk the earth. How well do you know Him? In the new book, 52 Weeks with Jesus, Dr. James Merritt leads you on a transformative journey, sharing what he has learned over a lifetime. This book will help you fall in love with the one who changed everything. 52 Weeks with Jesus is available now through Touching Lives. Order your copy by calling 800-413-1131 or go to touchinglives.org.
You don't have to look very far to find someone who is struggling in a marriage. What they need more than anything is hope. The kind of hope that's found only in Jesus. Because of the faithfulness of our partners, Touching Lives is presenting that message of hope all around the world through every available outlet. Together, we are sharing the message of hope.